May 4th, 1945. 14:15 hours. The town of Domažlice, Czechoslovakia. For 6 long years, this ancient Bohemian city has been crushed under the heel of the German Reich. Now, on the frayed edge of a dying war, its liberation is so close it is almost a physical taste. But between the people of Domažlice and their freedom stands one final, bloody obstacle. A garrison of over 200 heavily armed German soldiers dug in and with nothing left to lose. For the forward scouts of the American 28th Infantry Division, the situation is a tactical nightmare. They are a skeleton crew, an advance party far ahead of the main American force. They are outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in a deadly standoff. The air crackles with a radio transmission, the voice of command cold and clear. The order from headquarters is absolute, a direct prohibition echoing down the chain of command to every soldier on the line. All forward elements, this is keystone. I repeat, all forward elements, do not, under any circumstances, engage the enemy in Domažlice. Your orders are to halt, hold your position, and await the arrival of the main armored column. Do not initiate contact. Acknowledge. The command is strategically sound. Attacking a fortified garrison with a small reconnaissance unit would be suicide. The official plan is to wait for the tanks, for the artillery, for the overwhelming force that can guarantee victory with minimal casualties. But on the ground, time is a luxury they do not have. The German commander in Domažlice is a hardliner, and the panicked whispers from inside the town speak of executions, of final, desperate acts of brutality. For one American staff sergeant, the order to wait is not a strategy, it is a death sentence for the very people he has come to liberate. And in his mind, he reaches for a tool far more potent and far more forbidden than any weapon in his arsenal. A lie. A grand, theatrical, and utterly unauthorized deception. It is a bluff so audacious that if it fails, it will not only cost him his life, but will also earn him a court-martial. He knows the regulations. He knows the punishment for disobeying a direct order in a combat zone. But as he watches the German patrols move with impunity through the town square, a quiet, defiant decision solidifies in his mind. He would not wait for the tanks. He would become the tanks.
To understand the impossible choice Staff Sergeant Matt Konop made on that day, you must first understand the man. He was not a natural soldier. He was born in 1906 in Stengleville, Wisconsin, the son of Czech immigrants. Before the war, his world was not one of tactics and firepower, but of ledgers and law books. He was an auditor and a small-town politician, eventually becoming the mayor of his hometown. His battles were fought in council meetings and over municipal budgets. But there was another side to him, a skill honed not on the drill fields of basic training, but in the heart of his community. Matt Konop was a masterful public speaker. He understood people, their fears, their hopes, and most importantly, their expectations. He had the uncanny ability to command a room, to project an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence, whether he felt it or not. It was a skill born from his heritage. Growing up, he spoke Czech fluently, the language of his parents, a language he was told he would likely never need in America. That assumption was about to be proven spectacularly wrong. Konop and his men were part of the final push of General George S. Patton's Third Army. Their objective was to drive into the heart of Czechoslovakia and link up with the advancing Soviet forces. But in the war's chaotic final days, the front line was a fluid, unpredictable entity. Small American units like Konops often outpaced their own supply lines and support, creating pockets of extreme vulnerability. The strategic nightmare unfolding at Domažlice was twofold. First, the German garrison was not some demoralized rear echelon unit. It was commanded by a notoriously ruthless German officer named Hauptmann von Müller, a man known for his fanatical adherence to Nazi ideology. Intelligence suggested he was more than willing to fight to the last man and take the entire town with him. Second, and more critically, was the political dimension. The Yalta Agreement had drawn a line on the map just west of Prague. American forces were under strict orders not to advance beyond the city of Pilsen. But Patton, ever the aggressor, had pushed his men forward into a gray zone of political uncertainty. An American-initiated bloodbath at Domažlice could create an international incident, jeopardizing the fragile post-war peace before it had even begun. The order to halt and hold was as much about politics as it was about tactics. With Staff Sergeant Konop was a small reconnaissance platoon. Among them was Sergeant Hermann Ziegler, a pragmatic engineer from Philadelphia who could fix anything with a roll of wire and a string of curses. There was Corporal Bill Deadeye Miller, a quiet hunter from the mountains of West Virginia, their best marksman, and PFC Tony the Kid Gallo, a fast-talking New Yorker who, at 19, was convinced he was invincible. They were a typical cross-section of America, weary from months of fighting but bound by a trust forged in the crucible of combat. They trusted Matt Konop implicitly, not because of the stripes on his sleeve, but because his quiet confidence had gotten them through hell more than once. As they watched from a concealed position on a hill overlooking the town, the situation deteriorated. A white flag appeared from a window in the town square, a desperate plea from the town's mayor. A German patrol responded not with negotiation, but with a burst of machine gun fire, shredding the flag and the hope it represented. The official plan, the one that called for patience and overwhelming force, was failing. Every minute they waited was another minute the citizens of Domažlice were at the mercy of a cornered and vengeful enemy. The time for waiting was over.
From his vantage point, Staff Sergeant Matt Konop saw something everyone else had missed. It wasn't a tactical weakness in the German defenses. It was a psychological one. The German soldiers in Domažlice were isolated. Their command structure was in ruins, their information limited to rumor and propaganda. They knew the Americans were coming, but they didn't know how many, or with what kind of equipment. They were peering into the fog of war, and in that fog, their imaginations were running wild. Konop's aha moment was the realization that he didn't need to defeat the German garrison with force. He only needed to convince them that they were already defeated. The forbidden tool he would use was his voice, and the unauthorized tactic was a piece of pure, unadulterated psychological warfare. He would not just disobey his order to halt, he would impersonate the very armored column he was supposed to be waiting for. The execution began with a piece of masterful low-tech deception. Konop ordered Sergeant Ziegler to get their 2 jeeps in single half-track running, but they were not to advance. Instead, Ziegler was to drive them in a continuous loop behind the thick tree line, creating the illusion of a much larger convoy assembling just out of sight. He instructed the men to make as much noise as possible, shouting, banging equipment, creating the auditory signature of a battalion preparing for an assault. Meanwhile, Konop stripped off his combat gear. He put on his Class A uniform, the one reserved for inspections and leave, complete with polished brass and service ribbons. He commandeered a single jeep, placing PFC Gallo, the cocky New Yorker, in the driver's seat. His only weapon was a holstered .45 pistol. His real ammunition was the fluent colloquial Czech he had learned as a boy in Wisconsin. As the lone jeep approached the German checkpoint, a wave of confusion rippled through the defenders. This was not the attack they had been anticipating. It was an envoy.
a single, immaculate American officer driving towards them as if he were attending a parade. This brazen act was so far outside the standard rules of engagement that it was deeply unsettling. The German soldiers, rifles leveled, watched as the jeep stopped 100 feet from their barricade. Konop dismounted, standing tall and alone in the middle of the road. He held up a hand, not in surrender, but in a gesture of command. Then he did the last thing they ever expected. He addressed them, not in English or in formal German, but in perfect, fluent Czech, shouting toward the watching civilians who were peering from their windows. "People of Domažlice, I am Major Konop of the United States 5th Armored Division. My tanks surround your town. Tell the German commander he has 10 minutes to present himself to me for surrender terms, or I will be forced to level every building." From the perspective of the German soldiers, the psychological impact was devastating. First, the name Konop was a common Czech name. It created an immediate subconscious connection to the local populace, suggesting a deeper intelligence network. Second, the use of the Czech language was a stroke of genius. It bypassed the German command structure entirely, speaking directly to the terrified civilians who now began to murmur and stir. Their hope reignited. The German soldiers suddenly felt like outsiders in their own fortress. Most importantly, there was the lie, 5th Armored Division. It was a complete fabrication, but combined with the sounds of engines echoing from the woods behind him, it was a plausible and terrifying threat. The German commander now faced a dilemma. His lookouts couldn't see any tanks, but they could hear them. And, standing in the road, was a single, impossibly calm American officer who seemed to hold all the cards. Was this a trick? Or was he truly the harbinger of an unstoppable force, offering one last chance to avoid annihilation? Mueller's tactical certainty began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing dread. The tide turned with astonishing speed. Hauptmann von Mueller, a man who had sworn to fight to the death, agreed to meet. The bluff had worked. Konop, now fully in character as a high-ranking officer of an armored division, met Mueller in the no-man's land between the lines. He didn't negotiate. He dictated. He spoke to Mueller in English, his tone cold and dismissive. He informed the Hauptmann that his intelligence was perfect, that he knew the exact number of men and machine gun nests in the town. He gave Mueller a choice: an honorable surrender with full Geneva Convention rights, or the complete and utter destruction of his command by the waiting tanks and artillery. He gave him 5 minutes to decide. As Mueller hesitated, Konop glanced impatiently at his watch, as if the German's indecision was merely an inconvenience, a delay in a timetable that was already set in stone. The psychological pressure was immense. Surrounded by the sounds of an imaginary army and faced with the iron certainty of this lone American, the German commander broke. At 1600 hours, less than 2 hours after Konop began his audacious ruse, the entire German garrison of Domažlice surrendered. Over 200 armed soldiers laid down their weapons, captured by a single staff sergeant, a jeep driver, and the ghost of an armored division that existed only in their minds. The liberation of the city was achieved without a single American casualty. The legend of the Ghost Major of Domažlice was born. Years later, during a debriefing, a captured German lieutenant from the garrison was asked why they had surrendered so quickly to such a small force. His answer was a testament to the sheer brilliance of Konop's deception. We could hear the tanks. They were all around us in the forest. The officer, he was so calm. We believed he was a general. We believed we had no choice but to surrender or die.
The first verdict on Matt Konop's actions came not from a military tribunal, but from the people he had saved. They saw him not as a rule breaker, but as a liberator, the fulfillment of a 6-year prayer. The townspeople swarmed the American soldiers, offering them flowers, food, and tears of gratitude. They hailed Konop as their hero. An elderly woman, her face etched with the hardship of the occupation, broke through the crowd and grabbed Konop's hand, kissing it. "You have the name of a Czech. You have the heart of a Czech. God sent you to us." For the men of his platoon who had witnessed the entire unbelievable affair, their respect for their staff sergeant solidified into awe. They had been prepared to die in a bloody, house-to-house fight. Instead, they were being celebrated as heroes, all thanks to Konop's colossal bluff. Sergeant Ziegler, the pragmatic engineer, slapped Konop on the back, a wide grin on his face. "Major," he said, the nickname already sticking, "I don't know how the hell you did that, but I'll buy you a drink for it." Their validation was immediate and absolute. The verdict from his superiors, however, would be far more complicated. When the actual American armored column finally rolled into a peacefully liberated Domažlice several hours later, the commanding officer was met not with a tactical briefing, but with a full-blown festival. His confusion quickly turned to fury when he learned the truth. Staff Sergeant Matt Konop was summoned to a 10th debriefing in the newly established command post. The colonel, a West Point graduate who lived and breathed regulations, was not impressed. "Sergeant," the colonel's voice was ice, "I have a report here that says you, a staff sergeant, identified yourself as a major, that you initiated contact with the enemy in direct violation of a clear order to halt and hold, that you single-handedly committed this entire division to a course of action without authorization. Is this report accurate?" The threat of punishment was very real. Disobeying a direct order in a combat zone was one of the most serious offenses in the military code. Impersonating an officer was grounds for immediate court-martial. Konop was facing disgrace, demotion, and even prison time. The colonel saw a man who had gotten lucky, a reckless amateur whose stunt could have backfired catastrophically. Matt Konop's defense was not an excuse. It was a simple, powerful statement of battlefield necessity. He didn't try to justify his deception or downplay his insubordination. He just stated the facts as he saw them. "Sir, my orders were to wait, but the German commander was preparing to fight. Waiting would have destroyed this town and killed hundreds of civilians. I saw a way to take the objective and protect those people without firing a shot. I took it." The colonel was unmoved, about to launch into a tirade about the chain of command, when another, higher-ranking officer stepped into the room. It was a brigadier general, one of Patton's trusted deputies. He had heard the story from the jubilant Czech officials. He looked at the pristine, undamaged town outside the window, then at Konop, and then at the furious colonel. This was a man who understood that war was not always fought by the book. He put a hand on the colonel's shoulder. "Colonel," the general said, his voice carrying the weight of finality, "are you telling me you want to punish the man who just handed you an entire city with a captured enemy garrison of 200 without spilling a single drop of American blood?" The room fell silent. The general turned to Konop. "Sergeant," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips, "your report will state that you were acting on a fluid tactical situation, and from now on you keep your mouth shut about being a major. Is that understood?" The threat of court-martial evaporated. In its place was a grudging, unofficial vindication. Konop received no medal for his actions that day. There was no formal ceremony, no public praise from high command. His reward was quieter, more profound. It was the sight of the Czech flag flying freely over the town square, the gratitude in the eyes of the people he had saved, and the unspoken respect of his commanding officers. For a quiet professional like Matt Konop, it was the only reward that mattered.
The ultimate proof of Matt Konop's genius is not found in a medal citation, but in the evolution of military strategy itself. While his specific bluff was a spontaneous act of battlefield brilliance, it served as a perfect, real-world example of what would become a cornerstone of modern military doctrine: psychological operations, or PSYOPs. His actions at Domažlice became an anecdotal case study, passed down unofficially at first, then formally studied at institutions like the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school. The tactic of using a culturally attuned, linguistically fluent operative to sow confusion and bypass the enemy's command structure is now a formalized part of the unconventional warfare playbook, known under technical designations like auditory deception and cultural misdirection. Knopp's audacious lie had become doctrine. The story was not recorded in the broad strokes of official histories, but it lived on, vividly, in the memories of those who were there. Decades after the war, in a letter to his family, Corporal Bill Miller, the platoon's quiet marksman, wrote about that day. "I've seen a lot of brave men do a lot of crazy things in this war, but I never saw anything like what Sergeant Knopp did. He walked out there all by himself and beat an entire German company with nothing but words. He was the bravest man I ever knew." After the war, Matt Knopp returned to Wisconsin. There were no parades in his honor. He quietly went back to his life, serving his community, raising a family, and rarely speaking of his time in Europe. The ghost major of Domažlice became the mayor of his small town once more. He hung up his uniform and put away the memories, creating a powerful, poignant contrast between the quiet life he lived and the extraordinary events he had shaped. He was a humble man who, when faced with an impossible situation, had reached inside himself and found a hero. Late in his life, his grandson, determined to preserve his story, interviewed him about his experiences. When asked if he was scared, walking down that road alone to face 200 enemy soldiers, Knopp's reply was simple, honest, and revealed the heart of the man. "Oh, heavens, yes, I was terrified. My knees were shaking so hard I was afraid the Germans could see them from their barricade. But I knew it was the only way. Those people, they were my people. Their parents came from the same place mine did. I couldn't just stand by and wait for the tanks while they suffered. Sometimes you have to do what you know is right, even if the rules say it's wrong." True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it for the sake of others. If you found this story of unsung heroism as fascinating as we did, be sure to subscribe to WW2 Explained and join us as we continue to uncover the secret history of the war. Let us know in the comments which unsung hero we should feature next.